In this video we shall talk about test cases, their fields, properties and other ideas on test cases themselves. Here is the official definition of what a test case is. Here are 4 extremely useful points. First of all, any test case has to have inputs, actions, expected results, and that's all with some purpose. If such 4 properties are somehow missing from a test case, that test case may not be considered a good one. Before we begin talking about test case fields, here is some disclaimer. Yes, of course, each test case management tool has more fields, but here we shall review only key fields that are usually present in each and every test case management tool. So here is a quick overview of how some abstract test case may look like. As you can see, there are a lot of fields. So now we shall talk about all those fields and their values in details. We shall begin with the most simple one, that's the ID. It absolutely has to be unique in order for us to distinguish test cases. And if your test case management system allows, that ID may be somehow meaningful. It may contain some abbreviations, some numbers and so on. But in the worst case scenario, it's only a number, a unique number. The next field is priority. It shows us how important this test case is. It may be represented by letters, numbers, words and even more, because many test case management tools allow you to set up the scale and to name each point on the scale your own way. What is it correlated with? The requirement importance. Usually, the more important requirement this test case is related to, the more important this test case itself is. And it may be related with potential severity of a defect that this test case may detect. So, the more severe the defect it may detect, the more high priority this test case has. The next field is a related requirement. Of course, we were mentioning several times that it's not a good idea to write checklists or test cases directly on requirements. But when we look backwards, when we have a test case, we usually may find a requirement that is related to this test case. It's useful for several metrics. It's useful for the traceability. So usually most test cases have their reference. It just contains the ID of requirement this test case is intended to test. Yes, of course, it facilitates the traceability between requirements and test cases, and it's especially useful when a requirement is somehow changed. Our system, our project management tool, may show us that some related test cases have to be reviewed and somehow reworked. The next 2 fields are module and submodule. We were talking in some of the previous videos that it's a good idea to split your whole applications into some parts, some subparts and so on. So a module is a rather big part, and a submodule is a subpart inside that big one. It's easy, it helps to write good checklists and then test cases. So these fields show that part and subpart covered by this test case. It simplifies understanding of the test case purpose, and please be attentive. Module and submodule are parts. They are never actions. Because, of course, when we are splitting something into several parts, those parts are something existing but not some actions. Never some actions. For instance, let's take human as an example. We may somehow divide a human into a respiratory system, lungs, this is module and submodule, but we cannot divide a human into breathing, snuffing, snoozing, and so on. These are not submodules. These are some actions of a human. And again, Head, brain are module and submodule, but nodding, thinking are not. And once again, this should not be actions, this should be parts. The next field is test case title. Usually in modern test case management tools, this is a separate field. But here on the screen we have it at the top of some other information. So, what does the title do? It shows us the main idea, the purpose of the test case. It populates the test cases list. Usually when we have a list of test cases, we only see titles and maybe some dates, something like that here, but we usually do not see test cases bodies there, and it is one of the main data source we use when searching for a particular test case, so it's important. As you can see, a test case should always have a title. There may be a single test case without a title. And in most test case management tools, this is a mandatory field, so you may not submit a new test case until you fill the title field. The next part of the data describing a test case is preparations, or in some cases preconditions, initial data, setup, etc., etc. It's something that's going between title and steps here. It may be either present or absent, that doesn't really matter. Some test cases may not need preparations, but in most cases they do. So it's optional field, and when we are speaking about preparations, not preconditions, not initial data, not setup, only about preparations. It usually describes some actions to be done or conditions to be met before the test case itself begins, before any actions with the application. Why is it important? Because if something fails here in preparations, we may not fail the test case and report a defect. That's only some ongoing trouble we have to fix. But the application is probably still okay. So that defect is about preparations only. And once again, it's optional. So maybe sometimes you'll see some test cases without any preparations, and that's okay. The next two sets of data should be described together, steps and expected results. For each step you may see numbers here. For the fifth step there is fifth expected result. For the fourth steps there is somewhere, you may rewind the video, there is fourth expected result, and so on. Steps describe actions to perform during the test case execution. And expected results describe the application reaction we are expecting. And both steps and expected results have the same numbers. So the first step, the first result, the second step, the second result, and so on. Usually people ask, do each and every step has to have expected result? The answer is yes. Of course, in real life you'll see that sometimes there are test cases without some expected results for some steps. Those expected results are considered to be obvious ones, but since you are just beginners, it's hard yet to understand if this is an obvious expected result or not. So please, for each and every step, write explicit expected result. If it's not needed, you may later delete it, but if it's needed and absent, that's the trouble. So always write expected results. And let's take a moment for one more general overview of all fields of a typical test case. And here are some useful ideas on how to write better test cases. There are several such ideas, and now we shall review them in details. First of all, it's usage of active voice and simple phrases without conditional something. Never write such phrases as when user does something. Just write this way. It's shorter, it's more understandable, it's better. Always use objective description. of expected results, because if someone writes something bad like this, for instance, the application works as it has to. What does it mean? I don't know. Nobody knows. Operation successful. How can I understand if it is successful or not? Okay, what's okay? So here are good examples. Some label appears, some result appears, some message appears, and so on. So this is objective, and this is not. And other three simple ideas, like write simple because it's really not a fiction novel, use simple approach, the simpler the better, use exact names for interface elements because usually most elements have names, or even if some element doesn't, you may write what is it. Maybe it's a checkbox or it's a radio button or something like that. By the way, do not confuse one with another, and don't explain basics like how to click a button or something like that, because we are hoping that the person executing your test case has basic computer knowledge.